Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. And before you're wondering, no, I didn't move. I'm just traveling at the moment and I'm staying at a friend's house, so that's why the background is different. Anyway, in today's video, I wanted to discuss a topic: literary fiction versus commercial fiction. I saw a video a couple of days ago made by Simon over at Savage Reads, in which he talks about the question whether literary fiction has to be non-commercial in order to be regarded as literary. I mean, that's a very short summary, sorry Simon, of his lengthy video. I will leave a link to the video down below because you should definitely watch it. Because I thought he raised some interesting questions, especially with regards to book prizes. He discussed a couple of books on the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction and also the Costa Award. He was a judge for the Costa Debut Award last year. And I thought he raised interesting points, but I also disagree with him on a couple of issues. So I wanted to film a reaction and put my 2 cents in. And the first thing I want to do is clarify a couple of things, because what we normally label commercial fiction is more often than not genre fiction. In other words, crime or sci-fi or fantasy. And we label these particular books a commercial because they appeal to a bigger audience, but also I think because especially genre fiction follows a certain pattern. If you love crime novels like I do, or sci-fi, and you pick up a new release, you as a reader, rightfully, you have certain expectations what a crime novel should be, which pattern a crime novel should follow. And of course, there are many variations in that pattern, but you expect something. In a crime novel, there has to be a crime, and the crime has to be solved, or at least there should be an attempt to solve the crime. And in sci-fi, depending on which kind of sci-fi, you also have, as a reader, certain expectations. And like I said, rightfully so. And the author knows these expectations, and he or she tries to fulfill them. But Simon didn't, at least I think, he didn't talk about that aspect of commercial fiction, genre fiction. He was much more concerned about the opposition of the two terms, literary and commercial. In other words, books that we label literary fiction and books that are up for literary fiction prizes, and that there is a sort of elitist opinion that books up for prizes shouldn't be commercial. In other words, shouldn't appeal to a big audience. And he discusses various points of this aspect. So we are not talking, in other words, about genre fiction, but we're talking about literary fiction. By the way, I don't think that is easy to define either, what we call literary, but that's a topic for a completely different video. Anyway, and I certainly agree with Simon on that particular point, that commercial and literary are not mutually exclusive terms. In other words, a work of fiction that is labeled literary but is a huge commercial success doesn't take away the label literary. So I certainly don't believe that the fewer people read a book, the better it is, or the more literary it is. That's just nonsense. And I mean, the best example I think you can give is an author like Shakespeare, who is, very highbrow in our days now. It's very literary to read Shakespeare. But he was a huge commercial success in his time. I mean, his plays, people went to his plays because they were so good and so entertaining. So there is no mutually exclusive rule that literary fiction, by definition, mustn't be commercial. But another thing, just I wanted to add here is because Simon talks in particular at length about two books. Gail Honeyman's book, Eleanor, Oliphant, is completely fine, and Joanna Cannon's book, Three Things About Elsie. Um, uh, and I talked about these particular two books because they are longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I will leave a link to my video, Cotton Candy, about those two books down below. And I was pretty negative about both books. But I wasn't negative because they were a commercial success. I was negative because I didn't think they were good books. Whether or not a lot of people bought them, that has no consequence for me when I judge a book. I just disagreed with Simon. He thought they were good books, obviously, and that's perfectly fine. And I thought they weren't. I thought they, for various reasons, and if you want to have, I'm not going to go into that now. You can watch my video about those two books. But I just thought they weren't very good. And that's the reason that I thought they didn't deserve a place on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. Another point Simon raised was the question of accessibility. In other words, whether a book that is accessible, written in an accessible way, can be literary, or whether to be literary, a book has to be inaccessible. Well, I already said before that I don't believe that the fewer people read a book, the better the literary quality is. So a book can be written in simple prose about a subject that has been written before a million times. By the way, most books are. I mean, not written in simple prose, but about a subject that has been written before a million times. But that doesn't mean they are not literary. And following from that, literary doesn't mean experimental. You can have, of course, very good books that try to push the boundaries of fiction and that are very experimental. And a lot of those books are very good, but not because they are experimental, but because they are good books. So, in other words, a book is not good just because it's experimental. And a book is not literary because it is accessible. But for me, where I disagree with Simon is the opposite is also true. In other words, a book is not good or good literature just because it's accessible and just because a lot of people read it. That's, for me at least, not enough to make it a good book. And on the contrary, I think that is sort of a reverse elitist point of view, or it could be. I don't think Simon meant it that way, but for me, this can be a point of view that is what I would call reverse elitist. In other words, telling readers, you are probably too stupid to read something that is not accessible in style or subject. And I don't believe that either. And when you look at book prizes, I was surprised to hear that Simon talked about the Costa, where he was a judge, like I said, and he said that one of the rules they were given as judges is for the debut fiction award that they should give the first prize to a novel which they could put in anybody's hands, whether that person reads one book a year or one book in every 10 years or 10 books a month. That was sort of the requirement for the prize. And I was surprised to hear that because, like I said, I don't think the appeal to as many people as possible is a qualification for a good book. A good book can be a book that is read by a lot of people, but not as a criterion. I don't think it's a worthwhile criterion. You should look at whether you think it's a good book, whether you think it's written well, whether the story is developed well, whether the characters are believable and authentic and complex, and whether there is a good character arc or a good plot development, and not purely look at a book and think, well, a lot of people can read that, so it must be good. So I'm not sure whether I understood his point correctly, but at least my point in this is that accessibility alone doesn't make it a good book, just as being not accessible makes a book good either. Anyway, I think I will stop rambling now. I hope I made my point, or at least, gave an explanation what I think of this opposition between fiction, literary fiction, and commercial fiction. And I'm, of course, as always, really curious to hear what you think, how you would judge a book if you were a judge for a literary prize, say. What would your criteria be to give a book the first prize? I would be really interested to hear that. So anyway, this was my Sunday discussion video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in the comments, and I will see you all soon in my next video. Bye bye.